The Galactic Council chambers stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystalline floor, with representatives from 47 species gathered in their designated sections. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime and converting thousands of languages into comprehensible formats for each delegate. Ambassador Daniel Harper stood at the human delegation platform, and his gray suit looked modest compared to the elaborate garments and biological displays of the other species. At 43 years old, he had spent the last decade building Earth's reputation among the stars. Beside him stood Lieutenant Sophie Blake as his security escort and Dr. Victor Chen as his chief science advisor. The humans had been part of the Galactic Council for only 12 years and still considered newcomers by species who had been traveling the stars for millennia. They were tolerated and sometimes respected, but never truly feared. That was about to change in ways nobody could predict. The Kravik delegation occupied the eastern wing of the chamber. They were a reptilian species and standing nearly 3 meters tall with scales that shifted from deep purple to angry red depending on their mood. Their empire controlled 17 star systems and had been expanding aggressively for the past century. The Council had done little to stop them and instead choosing appeasement over confrontation. Ambassador Harper had come to change that policy. The evidence is undeniable, and Harper's voice carried across the chamber as holographic displays showed destroyed colonies and displaced populations. The Kravik Empire has violated the Treaty of Solus Prime by attacking 3 independent worlds in the Outer Rim. These were protected territories. Under Council law, War Master Thrak and leader of the Kravik delegation rose to his full imposing height. His scales rippled red with barely contained rage. The human speaks of matters beyond his understanding. Those worlds harbored criminals and insurgents. We acted within our rights to maintain order. You acted as conquerors, and Harper responded calmly. The Council charter is clear. Independent worlds cannot be annexed without proper authorization. Silence and Thrak's roar echoed through the chamber. Several smaller species cowered at the sound. You humans arrived yesterday in galactic terms. You know nothing of how power truly works among the stars. Your kind should be grateful we allow you to speak at all. The chamber fell deathly quiet. Even the translation devices seemed to pause as if uncertain how to process such a direct insult. Ambassador Harper remained perfectly still and his expression unreadable. Sophie Blake's hand moved subtly toward her sidearm, but Harper gave the slightest shake of his head. War Master Thrak, and Harper's voice remained steady and diplomatic. I understand the Kravik have centuries of military tradition, but tradition does not exempt anyone from Council law. I'm asking you to withdraw your forces and submit to arbitration. Thrak's laugh was a harsh and grating sound. He stepped down from his platform, and his massive form moving with surprising speed. The other delegates shifted nervously, but the chamber guards made no move to intervene. This was technically within acceptable debate parameters. The War Master approached the human delegation platform, and towering over Harper by nearly 2 meters. His breath, hot and reeking of sulfur, washed over the ambassador's face. You ask us to submit? And Thrak leaned closer, and his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Perhaps your species needs a demonstration of why the Kravik are not questioned. What happened next occurred in less than 3 seconds, but it would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Thrak's clawed hand shot out faster than most species could track and seized Ambassador Harper by the throat. The human's feet left the ground as the War Master lifted him effortlessly into the air. Sophie Blake's weapon cleared its holster, but Dr. Chen grabbed her arm, and his face pale with shock. This is what happens, and Thrak announced to the chamber, when lesser species forget their place. The Kravik War Master's claws tightened, and Ambassador Daniel Harper's neck snapped with an audible crack. The sound echoed through the silent chamber like a gunshot. Thrak held the body aloft for another moment, then dropped it carelessly to the floor. Sophie Blake screamed in a raw sound of fury and grief. Her weapon came up, but before she could fire, 4 Kravik guards had their plasma rifles trained on her. Dr. Chen pulled her back, and tears streaming down his face. The other delegates sat in stunned silence. Some species had seen violence before, but never in the Council chambers themselves, never against a registered ambassador. The rules of galactic diplomacy and thousands of years old had just been shattered. Thrak wiped his claws clean with a ceremonial cloth, and his scales settling to a satisfied purple. Let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the Kravik Empire. We do not negotiate with inferiors. The council chairman and a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix finally found its voice. Warmaster Thrak, you have committed an unthinkable act. The murder of an ambassador is the gravest violation of council law. Must what? And Thrak interrupted. Submit to your powerless justice. The council has no authority over the Kravik. It never has. He turned to address the assembly. Any species who wishes to protest this action may do so. We will be happy to demonstrate our response. The chamber remained silent. One by one, delegates lowered their eyes and unwilling to meet the Warmaster's gaze. The message was clear. The Kravik had done what they wanted and no one would stop them. Sophie Blake knelt beside Ambassador Harper's body and her hand on his cooling wrist, and her face a mask of barely controlled rage. Dr. Chen stood beside her and his scientific mind already recording every detail and knowing that Earth would demand a full accounting. Retrieve your dead, and Thrak said dismissively to the humans. And remember this day when you consider speaking against us. Again, as Sophie and Victor carefully lifted their ambassador's body and preparing to carry him from the chamber, the lieutenant spoke, quietly but clearly enough for the nearby delegates to hear. You have no idea what you've just done. Thrak laughed, and the sound rolling across the chamber. Threatened by humans, your species has been in space for barely a breath. You have no fleet capable of challenging us and no weapons we fear and no allies who would dare support you against the Kravik Empire. Sophie Blake looked up at the towering Warmaster and her eyes dry, now and cold and calculating. We'll see. The human delegation left the council chambers in silence and carrying the body of their ambassador. Behind them, the other species began to murmur, and some expressing shock and others discussing the political implications. But not one voice rose in defense of the humans or condemnation of the Kravik. They were alone. What none of them knew, and not even the humans themselves, was that this moment would mark the beginning of the end for the Kravik Empire. Because there was one thing about humanity that the galaxy had not yet learned, and one aspect of human nature that 12 years of peaceful diplomacy had kept hidden. Humans could be patient. Humans could be diplomatic. Humans could be forgiving, but humans never forgot, and they never ever left their dead unavenged. The emergency session of Earth Security Council convened 6 hours after news of Ambassador Harper's murder reached home. President Elena Martinez sat at the head of the table in the Situation Room, and her face carved from stone as she watched the recording for the 4th time. Around her sat the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense, and representatives from every major Earth. Government General Marcus Klein and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs froze the playback at the moment of Harper's death. This is an act of war. By any definition and by any measure, this is a declaration of war. Technically, and Director Kate Morrison of Earth Intelligence Agency interjected, it's an act of murder committed in neutral territory. The Galactic Council is debating whether to classify it as something else entirely. I don't care what the Council classifies it as, and Admiral Richard Hayes slammed his hand on the table. They murdered our ambassador in front of 47 species and no one did a damn thing to stop it. That tells me everything I need to know about the Council's spine. President Martinez raised her hand in silencing the room. Sophie Blake and Dr. Chen are on their way back with Ambassador Harper's body. They'll arrive in 14 hours. Before I make any decisions, I want to hear their full report. She turned to General Klein. Marcus, give me a realistic assessment. Can we take on the Kravik Empire? The general pulled up a holographic display showing the known galaxy. Red zones marked Kravik territory and blue showed Earth's limited colonial presence, and green indicated the neutral zones and other species' territories. The Kravik control 17 star systems, compared to our 5, and Klein began. They have an estimated 3,000 warships of various classes. We have 400, and most of which are designed for exploration and defense and not offensive warfare. So we're outgunned, and the president stated flatly. By conventional measure, yes, but we have advantages they don't know about. Klein nodded to Dr. Helen Carter and head of Earth's Advanced Weapons Research. Dr. Carter stood and her eyes blazing with barely suppressed anger. Ambassador Harper was my friend. We went to university together, so understand that what I'm about to share comes from a very personal place. She manipulated the holographic display, For the past 8 years, while we've been playing nice with the galaxy, we've also been preparing for the possibility that diplomacy might fail. A series of technical schematics appeared in the air. Project Ragnarok, Project Zeus, Project Longinus. The Council believes human technology is roughly equivalent to galactic standard. They're wrong. We've been reverse engineering every piece of alien tech we could get our hands on and then improving it. Secretary of Defense William Shaw leaned forward. Improving it how? Take their plasma weapons. Standard galactic plasma rifles operate at about 40,000 Kelvin. Effective, but the cooling systems make them slow to recharge. Dr. Carter smiled grimly. Ours operate at 60,000 Kelvin with a recharge rate 3 times faster. We just never told anyone. Admiral Hayes whistled low. What about the ships? The Kravik use quantum drives that can move a warship at roughly 50 times light speed. Our newest drives installed on the ships we've been building in the outer colonies can reach 95 times light speed. We're nearly twice as fast. President Martinez absorbed this information carefully. You're telling me we've been deliberately hiding our capabilities? Not hiding, ma'am. Exercising strategic patience. Ambassador Harper believed, and I agreed, that appearing weaker than we were gave us diplomatic advantages. No one fears what they think they understand. Dr. Carter's expression hardened. But they killed him for that perception of weakness. Time to show them the truth. General Klein brought up another display. Beyond technology, we have tactical advantages. The Kravik fight like they always have for thousands of years, with big fleets and direct confrontations and overwhelming force. It's how they've won every war. They're powerful but predictable, and we're not. And Admiral Hayes finished the thought. They've never fought humans before. They don't know our strategies and our tactics and our capacity for creative violence. Director Morrison spoke up, and her voice quiet but intense. My agents have been in Kravik space for 6 years. I have intelligence on every major military installation and supply line and command structure. The Kravik are arrogant. They never imagined someone might be watching them. President Martinez stood and walking to the window that overlooked the earth below. Lights from cities sparkled across the darkened continents. 12 billion people living their lives and unaware that their world stood on the brink of interstellar war. If we do this, and she said softly, and if we go to war, people will die. Our people. They're people. Probably millions before it's over. They already started it, ma'am, and General Klein replied. They murdered an unarmed ambassador in a chamber meant for peaceful negotiation. If we don't respond, what message does that send? That humanity can be killed with impunity. That we'll accept any insult and any attack because we're afraid. The president turned back to face the room. And the Galactic Council, what's their position? Director Morrison pulled up a report. Mixed. Most species are horrified by what happened but terrified of the Kravik. Several minor species have sent private messages of support, but won't commit to anything public. The major powers are staying neutral. They want to see what we do before they pick a side. Cowards, and Admiral Hayes muttered. Pragmatists, and the president corrected. They've survived for millennia by not making enemies of species stronger than themselves. We've only been in space for 12 years. They don't believe we can win. Then let's prove them wrong, and General Klein said. President Martinez returned to her seat, and her decision made, but the weight of it visible in her eyes. We wait for Sophie and Victor's report. Then we vote. But I'll tell you now where I stand. She looked each person in the eye. Daniel Harper was a good man. He was a husband and a father and a dedicated servant of Earth. He believed in peaceful coexistence and in the power of words over weapons. And they killed him for it, her voice hardened. The Kravik think we're weak. They think we'll do nothing. They think we're just another minor species to be bullied and dismissed. She stood again, and this time with the bearing of a leader ready for war. I say we show them what humans do when you murder one of our own. The room erupted in agreement and a mix of grim determination and barely contained fury. Plans began immediately, with generals and admirals calling up force deployments and fleet movements and strategic assessments. Dr. Carter approached the president as the others worked. Elena and Daniel wouldn't have wanted this. He believed in peace, I know, and the president replied quietly. But sometimes the only way to achieve lasting peace is to make war so terrible that no one dares start one again. The Kravik need to learn that lesson. And we're going to teach it to them. The Mars shipyards hung in orbit above the red planet, and a sprawling complex of construction bays and dry docks and manufacturing facilities stretching over 600 kilometers. For years, the facility had been dismissed by galactic observers as a modest operation and producing exploration vessels and defensive platforms. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. Fleet Admiral Patricia Stone stood in the command center of Dock 7 and watching through the reinforced viewports as ships that weren't supposed to exist prepared for launch. Behind her, the display screen showed similar activity at 12 other hidden shipyards across the solar system. Status report, and she called out. Commander Luis Vega pulled up the deployment roster. The Valkyrie-class destroyers are ready. All 48 ships report full combat readiness. The Thor-class battlecruisers need another 6 hours for final weapons calibration. The Mjolnir-class dreadnoughts are ready to bring the hammer down, ma'am. Stone allowed herself a thin smile. The dreadnoughts were her pride and joy. 6 ships that each massed 4 times what the Kravik called a battleship, and equipped with weapons the galaxy had never seen. They had been built in secret over 7 years, and assembled in the dark between Mars and Jupiter, where no curious sensors would spot them. The Kravik thought Earth had 400 ships. The truth was closer to 900, and the 400 they knew about were the oldest and slowest ships in the fleet. Everything humanity had learned about galactic warfare had been incorporated into these newer vessels. Everything humanity had learned about killing efficiently had been added as well. What about Project Odin? And Stone asked. Vega's expression became serious. Loaded and armed on the dreadnought Washington. General Klein has final authorization, but the weapon is ready for deployment. Project Odin was the contingency plan. The weapon they hoped they wouldn't need to use but had built anyway because humans always prepared for the worst-case scenario. Stone had reviewed the specifications and read the projected casualty estimates and signed off on its construction with a heavy heart. Across the solar system, similar preparations were underway on Luna Base and General Andrew Park, watched as his special operations teams conducted final training, exercises in the low-gravity environment. These weren't regular soldiers. They were humanity's best and brightest, and trained in every form of combat from classical warfare to cutting-edge technical assassination. Run the scenario again, and Park ordered. On the training floor below, a team of 12 operators executed a simulated raid on a Kravik command center. They moved with inhuman precision, and the result of enhancement protocols that pushed human physiology to its absolute limits. Neural implants improved reaction time. Genetic modifications increased strength and endurance. Quantum encrypted communication let them share tactical data in real time. The Kravik had bioengineering technology, but they had never needed to push it to its limits because they had always been the biggest and strongest species in the room. Humans had spent centuries fighting each other and learning exactly how to maximize the lethality of a soldier. These operators weren't just soldiers. They were living weapons. Timon Park asked. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, and his aide reported. 7 seconds faster than last run. Not fast enough, and Park replied. Run it again. And this time assume the Kravik have reinforcements incoming. I want to see speed and adaptability. The teams reset without complaint. They knew what was coming. They had seen the recordings of Ambassador Harper's death. Every single operator had volunteered for the frontline missions and knowing the casualties would be high. But they were willing to pay that price. At the Advanced Weapons Research Facility hidden in the asteroid belt, and Dr. Helen Carter worked with barely contained fury. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford, and not when there were weapons to perfect and delivery systems to optimize. The Ragnarok missiles are ready, and her chief engineer reported. We've solved the stability problem with the antimatter containment. They'll fly true. And the Zeus platforms and Carter asked deployed around Kravik's primary worlds 2 months ago, and just like Director Morrison planned, they've been running silent and looking like standard navigation beacons. The Kravik have scanned them dozens of times and found nothing suspicious. Carter nodded with grim satisfaction. The Zeus platforms were brilliant in their simplicity. Small satellites with powerful weapons and hidden in plain sight in high orbit around Kravik population centers. When activated, they would rain hell down before the Kravik even knew they were under attack. It was the kind of sneaky and underhanded tactic that the honorable warrior species would never expect. But then humans had never claimed to fight fair. They claimed to fight to win. What about Longinus? And Carter asked. Her engineer's expression became troubled. That's the one I'm worried about, Doctor. The theory is sound, but we've never tested it at full scale. If the calculations are off even by a fraction, then a lot of people die. Then a lot of people die and Carter finished. I know, but if we need it, we'll use it. Make sure the firing solutions are perfect. Longinus was the weapon that kept Carter awake at night. Not a bomb or a missile, but something far more terrible. A way to weaponize space itself and to turn the fabric of reality into a weapon. If it worked, it would be devastating. If it failed, it might destroy the ships firing it along with their targets. Back on Earth, and President Martinez met with the ambassadors from the few species willing to speak with humanity. The Council had officially issued a statement calling for restraint and dialogue, which everyone understood as diplomatic. Code for "Please don't upset the Kravik." Ambassador Kelvin stood before the President and his insectoid features clicking with agitation. His species, the Variks, controlled only 3 small systems, but they had been among Earth's earliest. Supporters of President Martinez and my government wishes you to know that while we cannot offer military support, we stand with you in spirit. What the Kravik did was unconscionable. Spirit doesn't win wars, Ambassador, and Martinez replied, but her tone was gentle. I understand your position. The Kravik could destroy your worlds as easily as they killed Ambassador Harper. I don't ask you to fight. What do you ask? And Kelvin said, stay out of our way. And when this is over, remember who stood up to the bullies. Kelvin's compound eyes reflected the lights of the room. The Kravik have never lost a war, Madam President. They have crushed every species that challenged them. I've considered everything, Ambassador. The time for consideration is over. She stood and extending her hand. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your support, limited as it may be. After the ambassador left and Kate Morrison entered with the latest intelligence reports. The Kravik are mobilizing their fleet. They probably think it's a show of force to intimidate us. They've moved 3 battle groups to the edge of their territory closest to ours. How many ships? And Martinez asked. About 500. Heavy cruisers and battleships and support vessels. It's a standard Kravik intimidation formation. President Martinez studied the holographic display showing the Kravik fleet positions. They're putting themselves exactly where we want them. Yes, ma'am. They're so confident we won't attack that they're grouping up and making themselves perfect targets. It's almost insulting how little they think of us. Good. Let them stay confident. When do our forces move into position? Fleet Admiral Stone reports the main fleet can be ready to launch in 20 hours. General Park's special operations teams are already en route to their insertion points, and the Zeus platforms are awaiting your authorization code. The President walked to her desk and picked up a photograph. Ambassador Daniel Harper and younger in the picture and smiling at some long-ago diplomatic function. He had been a good man and an optimist who believed that reason and communication could solve any problem. He had been wrong. Some problems could only be solved with force. Tell Admiral Stone to begin the operation in 24 hours, and Martinez said quietly, and may God forgive us for what we're about to do. The Kravik battle group stationed at the border of their territory was designated Task Force Domination. It consisted of 500 warships arrayed in a classic intimidation formation with heavy battleships at the center and cruisers forming a protective screen and destroyers on the flanks ready to pursue any fleeing enemy vessels. It was the formation they had used for 1,000 years and refined through countless victories. Admiral Korath commanded, from the dreadnought Conqueror's Pride in a vessel that had seen 40 campaigns and never known defeat. He watched the sensors with satisfaction as they showed the approaching human ships. They're actually coming, and his tactical officer reported with something like disbelief in his voice. 150 vessels on intercept course. The fools, and Korath laughed. They bring a fraction of their pathetic fleet against us and expect what? To fight us to a draw, to earn respect through futile sacrifice. He activated the fleet-wide channel. All ships in battle formation Delta. We will crush them quickly and then proceed to Earth itself. Let this be the lesson that teaches humanity its place. The Kravik fleet adjusted and weapons powering up and shields engaging. They were ready for a traditional engagement with close to medium range and heavy plasma exchanges and boarding actions if needed. It was how space combat had always worked. They were about to learn that humans didn't care how things had always worked. The human fleet approached at high speed and far faster than the Kravik expected. Admiral Stone watched from the bridge of the dreadnought. Washington and her expression calm despite the tension that filled the air. Range, and she asked, quietly. 3 million kilometers and closing, and Commander Vega reported. The Kravik are holding position, and probably planning to engage at standard combat range around 500,000 kilometers. They're not moving to intercept us at all. They're waiting like it's a jousting match, and Stone noted. How very obliging of them. Tactical and weapon status. All Ragnarok missiles armed and ready. Zeus platforms are receiving targeting data. Longinus weapon is on standby. Stone nodded. Execute Alpha Strike on my mark. All ships and fire at maximum effective range. Don't wait for them to shoot first. Remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. At a range of 1 million kilometers and well beyond what the Kravik considered effective combat distance, the human fleet fired. The Ragnarok missiles weren't like standard galactic torpedoes. They were smaller and faster, and armed with something the galaxy rarely used because the technology was considered too dangerous, which was antimatter warheads. Each missile carried the destructive equivalent of a small star going supernova and compressed into a magnetic containment field barely larger than a fist. 200 missiles, launched simultaneously and their drives pushing them to relativistic speeds in seconds. The Kravik sensors detected the launch, but the tactical computers dismissed them as a desperation move. No missiles could cross 1 million kilometers before being intercepted. They crossed it in 14 seconds. Admiral Korath had just enough time to register shock before the first wave hit. Explosions bloomed across his fleet as the antimatter warheads detonated against shields that weren't designed to handle such concentrated energy releases. 30 Kravik ships died in the first salvo and their hulls vaporizing in balls of white-hot fury. Return fire, and Korath screamed. All ships and return fire. The Kravik fleet launched their own missiles, but the human ships had already changed course and using their superior speed to arc away from the predictable trajectories. The Kravik weapons, while powerful, were slower and less maneuverable. Most missed entirely. Second wave and launch, and Stone ordered calmly. Another 200 Ragnarok missiles streaked across the void. The Kravik point defense systems were frantically trying to intercept, but the missiles were too fast and too small, and there were too many of them. Explosions continued to ripple through the Kravik formation. They're breaking formation, and Vega reported. The Kravik fleet is attempting to scatter and close the range. Don't let them. All ships, and maintain maximum engagement distance. Make them chase us while we pick them apart. It was a tactic human naval forces had pioneered centuries ago back on Earth's oceans. Stay at range and stay mobile and wear down the enemy without ever letting them bring their superior close-range weapons to bear. The Kravik were stronger in a direct slugfest. So humans simply refused to have a slugfest. For 6 hours the battle continued. The Kravik tried every formation and every tactical doctrine in their considerable experience. Nothing worked. The human ships were too fast and their weapons too long-ranged, and their tactics completely alien to everything the Kravik had ever faced. Admiral Korath watched his fleet being systematically destroyed and his mighty warships reduced to drifting debris one by one. He had started with 500 ships. He now had fewer than 200, and more were dying every minute. This is impossible, and he muttered. They're not even getting close. How can they fight like this? Where is their honor? His tactical officer, and younger and less wedded to tradition, spoke up. Sir, they don't care about honor. They care about killing us efficiently. Korath's scales flushed red with rage, and for the first time in his long military career, genuine fear. He opened a channel to Kravik High Command. This is Admiral Korath of Task Force Domination. I am engaged with a human fleet. I have sustained heavy casualties and request immediate reinforcement. The response came from War Master Thrak himself, and his voice dripping with disdain. You outnumber them and you're requesting assistance. What kind of warriors are you, sir? You don't understand. They're not fighting like any opponent we've faced. Their weapons and their tactics, and they're completely different from anything we know. Enough, and Thrak roared. Hold your position. I'm bringing the home fleet personally. We'll show these humans what real power looks like. The channel closed. Korath looked at what remained of his once mighty task force and knew he wouldn't survive long enough to see reinforcements arrive. He was correct. 30 minutes later, Admiral Stone gave the order to activate the Zeus platforms. Around 7 major Kravik worlds, the innocuous-looking navigation satellites suddenly came alive. Their disguised armor plating fell away and revealing weapons platforms bristling with railguns and plasma cannons and missile tubes. Before the Kravik planetary defenses even registered the threat, the Zeus platforms opened fire, kinetic projectiles moving at a significant fraction of light speed, hammered into military installations and shipyards, and command centers. The platforms had been positioned months ago and given plenty of time to calculate perfect firing solutions. They didn't miss. On the Kravik homeworld of Kravos Prime and Warmaster Thrak watched in horror as his capital's orbital defenses were systematically demolished. Entire military complexes disappeared in flashes of light. The primary shipyard, which had been constructing the next generation of Kravik dreadnoughts, broke apart and fell from orbit with pieces of it burning up in the atmosphere like meteors. How? And he whispered. How did they get weapons into our orbit? They've been there for months, sir, and one of his aides reported, and her voice shaking, hidden as navigation beacons. We scanned them dozens of times. Found nothing. Thrak's mind reeled. The humans had infiltrated their space months ago. They had planned this. They had prepared. While he had been gloating about killing their ambassador, they had been moving pieces into place for this exact scenario. Get the home fleet mobilized, and he ordered. I want every ship and every warrior ready to launch immediately. Sir, the shipyards are heavily damaged, and the aid began. Now, and Thrak roared. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened under very different circumstances than its last gathering. The crystalline chambers, which had witnessed Ambassador Harper's murder, now hosted representatives from every species in known space. But this time the humans were not alone. Lieutenant Sophie Blake stood where Ambassador Harper had stood, but her uniform was now that of a decorated military officer rather than a diplomatic aide. Beside her stood General Marcus Klein and Fleet Admiral Patricia Stone. Behind them, displayed on holographic screens that couldn't be ignored, was the complete accounting of the Kravik defeat, with 700 ships destroyed and 37 military installations eliminated and orbital infrastructure devastated, the mathematical proof that humanity could and would fight back. Warmaster Thrak was not present. He had been removed from command by his own government, and the Kravik Council of Elders finally recognizing that their warrior culture had led them to catastrophe. In his place stood Administrator Fexel, and an older Kravik whose scales showed the deep blue of wisdom and regret, the council chairman, and the being of pure energy that had presided over Harper's death spoke first. Its voice carried the weight of shame. The council acknowledges that we failed in our most basic duty. An ambassador was murdered in these chambers, and we did nothing. We chose silence over justice because we feared the Kravik's strength. We were wrong. Admiral Stone stepped forward, and her voice carrying clearly across the vast chamber. The Kravik Empire declared war on humanity by murdering Ambassador Daniel Harper. We responded as any sovereign species must, with force. But we have no desire to continue this war. We seek only what any civilized species should expect, which is justice and accountability and assurance that such an attack will never happen again. Administrator Vexal rose, and his movements slow and deliberate. When he spoke, his voice lacked the arrogance that had characterized Thrak's speeches. The Kravik Empire offers formal apology for the murder of Ambassador Harper. It was an act unbecoming of any civilized species and a violation of every principle this council was founded upon. We cannot undo what was done, but we can ensure it never happens again. Words are insufficient, and General Klein interjected. The Kravik have spent centuries conquering and intimidating. An apology doesn't balance the scales. What would balance them? And Vexel asked quietly. Sophie Blake, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was steady but edged with the grief she had carried since watching her mentor die. The 17 systems you've conquered in the last century. Recognize their independence. Withdraw your occupation forces. Pay reparations to the species you've displaced, and accept council oversight of your military actions for the next 50 years. The chamber erupted in noise. Several species expressed shock at such harsh terms. Others murmured approval. The Kravik delegation stiffened, and scales flickering between colors indicating anger and shame. You ask us to surrender our conquests, and Vexel said slowly. To accept foreign oversight of our military. This would be seen as humiliation. Ambassador Harper's murder was a humiliation, and Sophie replied. His body lying on this floor while you celebrated was a humiliation. The galaxy watching and doing nothing was a humiliation. These terms are justice, Admiral Stone added, her voice. And they're generous. We could demand more. We could demand occupation of Kravik space and dismantling of your entire fleet in tribute. We don't. We ask only that you give back what you took illegally and prove you can be trusted again. The council chairman spoke again. The council supports these terms. Furthermore, We propose a new charter amendment that any attack on an ambassador of any species will be treated as an act of war against the entire council. We will no longer stand by while might makes right. One by one, species began to voice their agreement. The smaller species, who had lived in fear of the Kravik for generations, spoke with newfound courage. The major powers, who had maintained neutrality, now committed to enforcement of the new rules. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had catalyzed that change. After 6 hours of debate, Administrator Vexal stood again. The Kravik Empire accepts these terms. We will withdraw from the conquered systems and pay reparations as determined by neutral arbitrators, and accept council oversight. We do this not just because we lost, but because we have learned a truth we should have known all along, that strength without honor is not strength at all. It is merely bullying. He turned to face the human delegation directly. Ambassador Harper came before us with words of law and peace. War Master Thrak responded with violence because he believed we were stronger. We have learned at terrible cost that strength is not measured only in weapons and warriors. It is measured in character and in the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult. Ambassador Harper had that strength. We did not. Sophie Blake felt tears threatening but held them back. She nodded once in a gesture of acknowledgement, if not quite forgiveness. The council session concluded with the formal signing of what would become known as the Harper Accords. They fundamentally restructured galactic politics and establishing clear consequences for aggressive actions and protections for diplomatic personnel. More importantly, they established that the law applied to everyone, and not just those too weak to resist it. That evening, the human delegation gathered in their quarters on the council station. Dr. Victor Chen had arrived earlier in the day and ready to resume his duties with the diplomatic service despite his trauma. He raised a glass of Earth whiskey carefully smuggled aboard station. To Daniel, Harper and Victor said quietly, "Who believed words were stronger than weapons?" To Daniel, Harper and the others echoed. "He was wrong, though," and Sophie said after a moment. "Words weren't enough. It took violence to get justice." Admiral Stone shook her head. He wasn't wrong. His words laid the foundation for everything that came after. He built relationships and established Earth's reputation as reasonable and principled. When we went to war, the galaxy understood why. Without his years of diplomacy, we would have been seen as just another aggressive species. Because of him, they saw us as defenders, not conquerors. General Klein added his thoughts. And his death united Earth in a way nothing else could. Every human saw that recording and felt the same fury. We had been divided on a lot of things, but Harper's murder made us one people with one purpose. That unity was as important as any weapon we deployed. So his peace made our war possible, and Victor mused. And our war made his vision of a just galaxy possible. That's complicated. Welcome to human history, and Admiral Stone said with a tired smile. It's all complicated. The news reached Earth to celebration, but it was a subdued celebration. Casualties had been relatively light by historical standards, with fewer than 3,000 dead. But each one had a name and a family, and a life interrupted. President Martinez attended the memorial services personally, and speaking with the families and sharing their grief at Arlington Space Cemetery, where Ambassador Harper had been buried with full honors too. Weeks earlier, a new section was dedicated for those who had fallen in what was officially being called the Kravik War, though most humans simply referred to it as Harper's War. The President stood before the assembled mourners and spoke simply. We did not want this war. We did not seek it. But when it came to us, we fought it with everything we had because we believe some things are worth fighting for. The right to live without fear. The right to have your voice heard. The right to expect justice when crimes are committed. Ambassador Harper believed in those rights. He died defending them with words. These brave men and women defended them with their lives. Let us honor them all by building the galaxy they dreamed of, where such sacrifices are never needed again. Sophie Blake was promoted to commander and appointed as the new Earth ambassador to the Galactic Council. It was a controversial choice, with some arguing that a military officer should not serve in a diplomatic role. But President Martinez had been firm in her decision. Sophie understood both the necessity of peace and the cost of war. That made her perfect for the job. On her first day in the role, Sophie stood at the same platform where Harper had stood and where he had died. The bloodstains had been carefully cleaned, but she could still picture exactly where he had fallen. I know what you're all thinking, and she addressed the council. You're wondering if Earth's new ambassador will be as reasonable as the last one, or if we've decided that violence is a better language than diplomacy. She paused in letting the tension build. Let me be clear. Earth prefers peace. We believe in dialogue and in cooperation, and in finding solutions that benefit everyone. Ambassador Harper taught us that, and his lessons remain valid. She let her gaze sweep across the assembled species and making eye contact with as many as possible. But we have also learned another lesson. Peace requires strength. Diplomacy requires the will to back your words with action if necessary. The Kravik tested whether we would defend our principles, and we showed them we would. That was not a lesson we wanted to teach, but it was one that needed learning. Her voice softened slightly. So here is Earth's position going forward. We will work with any species that seeks genuine cooperation. We will defend any species threatened by aggression. We will support the Council's efforts to maintain peace and order, but we will never again stand silent. We